Okay, so welcome. Again, my name is Ashley Smithers. I am with Clark Conservation District. We are a non-regulatory agency that helps provide technical assistance to landowners. We also put on an array of different workshops, such as this one, the Watershed Stewardship series. We also have another workshop series that is amphibians and stormwater. And so right now we've been doing that about once a month. So look to our website to see some more information about that. This is the first of the Watershed Stewardship series. We will have, like I said, we will be recording this so you can view it later. And then if you haven't, please feel free to sign up for our other series. Our last one is still TBD. We had the presenter had to change the date, and so I'm just waiting to hear back about that. But we will eventually have all of those up online. So if you have registered for this one today and you want to become a watershed steward, we encourage you to sign up for the other events. And then we will have a survey that it should pop up for you after we are done today, and then it will also come in an email tomorrow, and it will be on our website as well if you end up viewing this on YouTube later on. And so again, all of those are going to be, all that information is going to be shared on our website. And a special bonus is if you fill out the survey, you will be entered to win a sticker provided by the Stormwater Partners, which Eric Lambert is part of. So with that, I'm going to turn this evening over to Eric, and yeah, enjoy.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Eric Lambert. I work for Clark County Public Works Clean Water Division. I'm the outreach specialist there. And, you know, the background here you see is a Stormwater Partners logo there. Stormwater Partners is a group that I help to lead. It's a bunch of the local cities and the county in Clark County that collaborate on some education outreach projects. And this Explore Your Watershed campaign is something you can check out on our Facebook page, the Stormwater Partners Facebook page. A lot of cool things, and I'll give you a sneak preview of some of that stuff at the end of this presentation here. Also, I highly encourage you to check out these other events because I know some of the speakers and they're fantastic. Can really learn a lot from them. Well, let's get started. Again, Eric Lambert here, and we're going to talk about Clark County watersheds. We're going to begin by talking about what a watershed is because that can be a confusing term sometimes. And then we're going to move on to some of the different watersheds in our county. And we're going to also talk a little bit about some of the impairments or the pollutants that are commonly found in some of those watersheds. And we'll touch on at the very end a little bit about some things that people can do and keep in mind while they're doing their day-to-day activities to help prevent pollution. So the definition, a definition of it, an area of land defined by ridges that drains to a common water body. This picture illustrates it pretty well. As you can see, that red line is the ridge, and all of the arrows that are kind of more orangish red are draining down the hill into those streams, which become larger streams, which become a river. That is the watershed. The arrows that are pointing yellow outside, those would be some other watershed. And so I've actually got a video here because this is quite a common thing that people have a hard time understanding. I think this video illustrates it really well. I've had people say to me, hey, that watershed, you mean up in the mountains? Well, yes, it's up in the mountains, but truth be told, it's everywhere. So I'm going to play this quick video, which I think animates it and illustrates it really well. And first I'm gonna fix my audio.
What is a watershed? Is it a shed that holds water? Nah, try again. A watershed is all of the land that drains into the same location or body of water. People tend to think only of water bodies such as rivers, lakes, and wetlands as being part of their watershed. However, any land, whether it is park, farm, forest, school parking lot, and even the soil we build our homes on is also included. Think of a watershed as a funnel, collecting all the water within a specific area and draining into the nearest body of water. Drop by drop, water is channeled into soil, groundwater, creeks and streams, making its way to larger rivers and eventually the ocean. Everyone in the world lives in a watershed. Watersheds know no political borders, whether local, national, or international. Our environment, our economy, and our society all depend on a healthy watershed.
Great. So I think that video really does a good job of talking about what a watershed is. The other common misconception is that, you know, it's the pond or it's the creek. But truth be told, we are always in a watershed when we're standing on land here. So this picture, you know, watershed can come in. A watershed encompasses all of these different land uses, from I-5 to farmland to an apartment complex to a gas station to a whole bunch of bare soil that's going to become some development. Now, as you may be thinking about this, well, defined by ridges, well, within one ridge area, there might be another one, and there might even be another one. And so we have different words that we use to describe the kind of different sizes of watersheds. And they're not exactly, steadfast. They can be used a little bit interchangeably sometimes. But a basin typically refers to the largest portion here. You can see that light green part is the Columbia River Basin. This are all the major basins of North America. And within that, you can kind of see some little white lines there, perhaps. Those are the watersheds within that basin. And of course, with the Columbia River, there are many: the Snake River, the John Day River, the Willamette River. We have some local ones here, like the Lewis River, the East Fork. All of those drain into the Columbia River. And so they are the watersheds within the Columbia River Basin. And they can even be broken down even further into what we call sub-watersheds. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. This is the Columbia River Basin. You can see here on the map. It drains 258,000 square miles. And so Clark County is quite a small part of that drainage basin. We can zoom in again to Clark County's watershed map, and we can pick out the Lacamas watershed, and we can see some of the sub-watersheds there. China Ditch, Shanghai Creek, Mantley Creek. Now, a lot of these maps that I've got here came from the 2010 Stream Health Report that the Clark County Clean Water Division produced. And you'll notice that some of the different sub-watersheds are broken up in ways that just kind of talk about river miles, so sections of a stream. And some of that is just to kind of make it more convenient for mapping and for talking about different areas. So in many instances, a sub-watershed will be synonymous with the tributary or the stream that feeds into that larger stream or river. But as you can see, watersheds and subwatersheds can also include lakes like Lacamas Lake down here, which Lacamas Creek flows into and then continues to flow out of. So we're gonna start to talk specifics about some of the watersheds here, and I'm just gonna go in alphabetical order. So we'll start with Burnt Bridge Creek. Burnt Bridge Creek, this right here is a picture. You may be saying, wow, you know, if you don't live on the west side, you don't come out here a whole lot in Clark County, you know, you might think of Burnt Bridge Creek being like almost like a little ditch somewhere in East Vancouver. And this, of course, is where Burnt Bridge Creek is about to enter into Vancouver Lake. So the mouth of the river or the stream is much larger than where it is further upstream. So it does drain to Vancouver Lake. And Burnt Bridge Creek is typically about 4 to 10% forested and about 50 to 58% impervious. It is one of our most, if not the most, urbanized watershed in Clark County. The stream channels, because of all that development, that history, the stream channels now alternate between man-made ditches and natural channels as it flows west. And the headwaters there are around 162nd Avenue. And there are a few small tributaries that we'll go into now. Now, Burnt Bridge Creek, you know, has been cleared early on for agriculture, and then many of the wetlands were drained at that time, and so there really aren't a whole lot of intact headwater wetlands or nearby stream wetlands left anymore. Nearly all of it's developed, but some of the tributaries do include Cold Creek and Burton Channel, and I've also included some of the water quality issues. Now, I found all of these water quality issues on the Department of Ecology's website. They have a 303D listing. And so the Department of Ecology is going out and monitoring and testing water quality in a lot of these streams. And if they find an impairment or a level of a certain pollutant that exceeds the national acceptable standard, then they have to list it on the 303D list. And when that happens, then whoever jurisdiction that that stream is in, they have to come up with what they call a TMDL, a total daily maximum load plan, which is basically just a fancy way to say you need to figure out a plan of how you're going to address these pollutants. And as we see these water quality issues, bacteria and temperature specifically, we're going to start to notice that that a number of our streams are actually impaired in these ways. And bacteria, of course, refers to poop. Let's just call it what it is, and temperature, which you might not think of a pollutant as a pollutant, but in our environment here, you know, where we have a lot of fish species that rely on cool water, you know, it is a pollutant because, you know, one of the main reasons why we want to protect streams is to protect, you know, the fish and the wildlife within them. So temperature is listed as a pollutant. Dissolved oxygen and pH are also listed there. And we'll get into a little bit about how those get, how some of those impairments and water quality issues happen later on. But the next one we'll move to is the Columbia Slope, 25 square miles. This is kind of, there's a couple watersheds in here that that are listed at, and they were part of the Stream Health Report. Kind of an interesting one because there's a few other kind of little tributaries that we'll talk about, but all of this area refers to the area, you know, that's really right along the Columbia River that drains directly to the Columbia River, or is soaked into the groundwater there. And so it's 25 square miles, also very urbanized. we're talking about 5 to 15% forested and about somewhere between 30 to 50% impervious. I should note that the reason why I like to call out those figures is because there's a tremendous correlation between the amount of forested land and the health of a watershed and the amount of impervious surface. Impervious meaning any type of surface where water cannot infiltrate. We're talking about roads and buildings and driveways and sidewalks and parking lots, things like that. It makes a lot of sense that an area with a whole lot of impervious surface, which allows pollutants to collect and then until the next rain, and then the rain comes and washes across that impervious surface and drains to wherever it's draining, will be carrying a lot of pollutants and really be detrimental to the health of that stream and watershed. Again, a lot of the same things from Burnt Bridge Creek. It was cleared early on for ag, developed, a lot of the wetlands drained. And a lot of these places around here, as a result of the Missoula floods, there's a lot of gravel deposits. And so there's a lot of places along the Columbia Slope that just have tremendous drainage. And some folks up there that may be in other parts of Clark County, like Brush Prairie, may be saying, boy, I wish I could have that kind of drainage. And I think the speaker next week will talk more about some of that hydrology, but there's quite a difference as a result of past historic events like the Missoula floods. And so in the Columbia Slope, some of the notable tributaries, we have Fisher's Creek, Joseph's Creek, and Ellsworth Springs. And the water quality issues there include bacteria, temperature, and turbidity. Turbidity refers to how cloudy the water is. The next one that we'll go to, the East Fork Lewis River, 212 square miles. So it's a large watershed. About 25% of this watershed is actually in Skamania County. The East Fork generally flows west until it joins the North Fork Lewis River, often called just the Lewis River, which is a little bit west of La Center, a little bit south of Woodland, before those both drain directly into the Columbia River. So this watershed is fairly forested. In some of the sub-watersheds, and I'll just go over to that next one here. And some of those sub-watersheds of the East Fork Lewis River, such as Cedar Creek, you may find approximately 88% forested land and only 5% impervious surface. Some of the more developed sub-watersheds, such as McCormick Creek, is approximately 20% forested and about 19% impervious surface. And so there's also some room in between there for pasture land and open space area, which might not be either forest or impervious, and that can be a different story. A lot of times pasture land can be great because there's not as much runoff. But if you think about the way a forest in our area has evolved, there's really just the ultimate sponges. You have these trees with all these needles and surface area which can hold all those raindrops. You have a literal sponge on the forest floor with duff. And so when you're able to capture all that rain that we get and keep it where it is, that's usually a sign of a healthy watershed. So most of the watershed in East Fork Lewis River, the upper East Fork Lewis River, we talk about the upper part of the watershed being closer to where the headwaters are, where the start of it is mostly forested. And not surprisingly, as you move further west, you start to get a lot more urbanized as you get closer to the I-5 corridor, where it's a lot more low density residential, becoming even more higher density residential more and more from day to day. There are a lot of wetlands, near stream wetlands, and some headwater wetlands that are still intact out there. And, in that watershed, a lot of the middle and lower watershed originally was cleared for agriculture and timber, and they're still doing timber up in some of the upper watershed as well. The East Fork Lewis River is developing very rapidly, and so it's a very high priority watershed in our county for a couple of reasons. One, because it's a high priority for fish recovery because there's no dams, and so that makes it great for our fish species that can run up the stream and find a place to spawn and continue that life cycle. So a couple of the water quality issues, the most common ones that we'll see today, bacteria and temperature. And so, they're actually doing some work right now to address those. I think it was about maybe a year or two ago, the Department of Ecology, notified the jurisdictions that are part of the East Fork Lewis River and said, hey, look, we found that these, there's bacteria and temperature issues. And so we're doing some work there to address those. One of the work that's kind of interesting that we're doing for bacteria are some of my colleagues are on the stream monitoring team, and they are actually trying to find out, well, what type of bacteria are we talking? What type of fecal coliform bacteria are we talking about? Because it could be a lot of things. It could be geese, it could be horses, it could be cows, and so what we're doing is we're taking samples, but we're getting DNA testing too to figure out what animals are actually contributing this bacteria. And I don't have all the numbers about which is the highest, but what I did learn last week from some of my colleagues is that the one most common animal that they keep finding again and again is dog, and that's the same in Salmon Creek watershed as well. Gibbons Creek, some interesting things going on here actually. Gibbons Creek, about 40% forested, about 15% impervious. This is in the far southeast corner of Clark County, and it's about 13 square miles, so it's relatively small. The rest of it is in Skamania County, and it passes right through Steigerwald Lake National Wildlife Refuge, and then it drains into the Columbia River. Now, there's a really neat project going on right now with a Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership and the EPA and a whole bunch of other organizations, because as you may know about the dikes that are out there for flood protection. And there's actually a dike currently that goes right along Steigerwald on the south edge of it. And so when Gibbons Creek flows down, getting into the Columbia, it actually has to go down a ladder, which is a fish ladder, to get past the dike. Well, what they're planning to do, and I think they're meant to be breaking ground, I think, in June. So right this month, we'll see if any of that's changed with the current conditions. But they plan to move that dike and allow Gibbons Creek to kind of flow in an alluvium plain, to kind of flow naturally into like a wetland area, and that should do a lot to help help our fish species move up Gibbons Creek, because it is a salmon bearing stream. Again, with Gibbons Creek, the notable tributary there is Campen Creek, that is in the city of Washougal, and a little bit of it is in unincorporated Clark County. And they also throw in here, as you can see on the map, on the right side there, they have Lawton Creek, which is another nearby small watershed that's actually not connected in any way to Gibbons Creek. But again, as I had mentioned earlier, sometimes they kind of, for the stream health report, for convenience sake, kind of clump those in next to each other. And again, not surprisingly, we see some of the same water quality issues, bacteria and temperature there. Steigerwald Lake is about 13% forested and about 15% impervious, and there's not a whole lot going on there. There's a few forest roads and a parking lot, which will be changing for part of that project. You know, it's a floodplain, so you wouldn't expect the same type of forest, extensive forest out there. There are some beautiful oak trees out there if you get a chance. And I did hear that if you're planning to go out there right away, that it is closed for a little bit while they're doing construction. But I'm looking forward to when that reopens, because they're going to have some new trails. It should be a great place to see some wildlife. We'll move, looks like a little bit west from Gibbons Creek, northwest, and get to Lacamas Creek Watershed, which drains 67 square miles. It's entirely within Clark County. Lacamas Creek goes down, it goes into Lacamas Lake, goes through Round Lake, it eventually comes back out Lacamas Creek and drains into the Washougal River just before the Washougal River empties into the Columbia River. With regard to to Lacamas Creek, if you're talking about the upper Lacamas Creek, and you can see on these maps here, this is upper Lacamas Creek. I'm not sure if this is too small to read this legend here, but green stands for forest, and that kind of beige tan color represents pasture land. And then the orange represents development. So in upper Lacamas Creek, you know, we're in great shape here with about 83% forested land and only 6% impervious surface. You get closer down here to Dwyer Creek. This is Dwyer Creek right here, just a little bit west of Lacamas Lake. And, you know, you're looking at only about 14% of forested area and about 40% impervious surfaces. You know, this area, a lot of the pasture in Lacamas Creek still exists. There still is a lot of agriculture happening there. Pasture land managed properly can be great for, can be really good for a watershed. The one drawback is that a lot of times when these areas are converted to ag, a lot of times the wetlands are drained, and the wetlands are important features of a watershed, both for mitigating flood concerns and helping to filter out pollutants in the water. The Lacamas Creek watershed is also developing rapidly, and there are some dams in the lake from the paper industry. If you've ever been around Round Lake, there's that little dam you can walk over on the Round Lake Trail, which is a trail that I would recommend. You can see some of the water quality issues here, and there are a few: bacteria, dissolved oxygen, phosphorus, and temperature. Phosphorus is one that is often related to lakes because it's a pollutant that can accumulate, and so, you know, it's not surprising that, you know, a lot of lakes have challenges with flushing phosphorus out, but it's a nutrient that causes a lot of problems. In fact, the phosphorus, part of the problems that it causes is you start to get more plant growth, which when those plants start to decompose, that decomposition process uses up a lot of the dissolved oxygen, which is why dissolved oxygen is also listed here. It can also create issues with turbidity because that plant litter and that leaf litter, as it breaks down, also contributes to the cloudiness of the water. Okay, we'll move over to the North Fork Lewis River, 847 square miles, and that includes land in Clark, Cowlitz, and Skamania. The North Fork Lewis River, some people just call it the Lewis River, but as you can imagine, since it is a kind of the northern border of Clark County, there's a whole bunch of that in Cowlitz County too. The North Fork Lewis River flows west and then kind of heads south a little bit to meet up with the East Fork Lewis River. Again, that's just a little bit west of La Center, a little bit south of Woodland, and then it heads out into the Columbia River. It's about 40 to 75% forested, the part in Clark County, and about 3 to 14% impervious surface. So it's in pretty good shape on the Clark County side, and most of this watershed in Clark County is managed in forest for timber, and most of the wetlands are also still intact. So there's some good things that are still going on. There is some pasture land and a little bit of development concentrated around Amboy and Woodland. And historically, since settlers came, it really became forest and timber. Again, you can also, there's definitely some development pressure along the I-5 corridor for this part. And not surprisingly, there are still some water quality issues with temperature and bacteria. Temperature is a difficult one, because maybe it's not only about, the removal of trees that shade the water, or lack of groundwater recharge. It can also, there's surely a climate change component in there too. So it has me scratching my head sometimes about how a lot of these are going to be not listed for temperature moving forward. All right, the next watershed here we'll talk about is the largest watershed that's entirely in Clark County, and that is Salmon Creek, and it drains 89 square miles, and it also heads west, and it drains into Lake River. There's quite a bit of variability in the amount of forested land in this watershed in particular, because up in the headwaters up here, around Rock Creek, for example, you're looking at about 60% forested land and only 10% impervious surface. You head down here into, where's Cougar Creek? I think that's Curtin. Cougar Creek right here. You head down here, Cougar Creek right pretty close to I-5, 7% forest and 51% impervious surface. So, right around the same area that Burnt Bridge Creek, which runs right through the heart of Vancouver, is faced with. Has a lot of small tributaries along the way here. You can see all of these sub-watersheds or tributaries. And this area also cleared for ag early on. And then many of the wetlands drained at that time. And the middle of the watershed is really developing quickly, still in the same time, because a lot of this area is right around where you have 205. So when you have access to some arterial roads, then development will follow. And surprisingly, Salmon Creek has all these water quality issues: bacteria, temperature, dissolved oxygen, turbidity. But I've talked to a number of people, far wiser and a little bit older than me, that have been telling me that, yes, Salmon Creek definitely has some issues, but compared to what it was 20 years ago, we're actually making some progress, which is really neat to know and neat to see. There's a lot of work being done to bring salmon back to Salmon Creek by a lot of organizations, including Clark Public Utilities and Clark County. And it's nice to know that there is some progress being made there. One example is a salmon barrier at Highway 99 bridge was removed. So little things like that can make a big difference. Okay, Vancouver Lake and Lake River. There's a lot of history in Vancouver Lake. How it was formed, and a lot of it was man-made. It was a floodplain at one point, and was kind of dredged out to make a lake. And you can see the hints of that in the little island there that's in the middle of the lake. And Vancouver Lake is not historically forested because it was a floodplain, somewhat similar to Steigerwald Lake National Wildlife Refuge. But it drains 31 square miles, and Lake River drains Vancouver Lake to the Columbia. But an interesting thing to note is that the tidal influence of the Columbia River can actually push the Columbia back into Lake River as well. And so Lake River comes out the north side of Vancouver Lake. So you have Lake River going out the north part of Vancouver Lake, and you have Burnt Bridge Creek and Chicken Creek, a small little one, going into Vancouver Lake from the east. And you have this little thing that I think the Army Corps of Engineers built on the south part of the lake, and it's a flushing channel. And the idea was, hey, we know that lakes have some issues with nutrient accumulation, which can have detrimental effects on water quality. And so how do we, flush this lake a little bit? So there is a flushing channel, which sounded like a great idea. The problem was that it was just built far too small to really be effective. I have a colleague here who says it's kind of like trying to drain a bathtub with a straw. So, and I think he meant one of those cocktail straws. But it's a great idea. It doesn't really work so well in practice. But again, a lot of this watershed is not traditionally forested. And so it's about 8% forested, Lake River anyway, 8% forested, about 17% impervious surface. If you ever want a good look at Lake River, because it's not one you really get to see a whole lot, you got to take the Amtrak up north, and then you go right along Lake River. It's kind of cool, actually, if you ever want to check that out. Vancouver Lake, also about 8% forested and 18% impervious surface in that watershed, mostly just on the east side of it. Okay, so again, the water quality issues here, temperature, bacteria, we're not surprised about. And now that we know a little bit about lakes and phosphorus, as we saw in Lacamas Lake, phosphorus is also an issue here in Vancouver Lake. Not to mention having an input from Burnt Bridge Creek. There's a lot of stuff that's going into Vancouver Lake, and not quite as much stuff that's able to get out. Ooh, the next one we'll talk about is Washougal River, and that's 212 square miles. Only 50 of those square miles are in Clark County. And Washougal River drains directly into the Columbia River. And again, there's quite a difference here. If you go in the upper Washougal area, we're looking at 91% forested area, about 5% impervious surface. That's great. The lower Washougal area flips that quite a bit, and you're looking at 18% of forested area, about 28% impervious surface, and it drains kind of southwestward. In the middle area, there's some pasture land, some ag. There are some scattered intact wetlands still, which is great. And definitely some timber activity going on in the upper part of the watershed still. And so there is definitely some more development expected in this watershed as urban growth boundaries start to push out from Camas and Washougal. But the one thing you'll notice here is the only water quality issue that's listed on the Washougal right now is temperature, which is a great sign. Maybe one of our healthiest watersheds here in Clark County. Okay, the next one is West Slope. And this is kind of an interesting one because this is kind of talking about the Ridgefield area and the whole west side of Clark County pretty much, above Burnt Bridge, above Salmon Creek, and below the Lewis River. And this is kind of a hodgepodge of smaller sub-watersheds that were lumped into this thing that they called the West Slope for really just the purposes of the Stream Health Report. And what that encompasses about 40 square miles, and that encompasses Whipple and Flume Creeks, which drain to Lake River, and then you have Gee Creek here, which drains to the Ridgefield National Wildlife Refuge floodplains, and you have Allen Canyon Creek, which goes into Mud Lake and eventually into the Lewis River. So here's a map of that one, and Whipple Creek is one of the bigger watersheds in that area. And there is one tributary there, Packard Creek. Of course, if you haven't guessed, there's probably a lot more tributaries than what I've listed here, really, really small ones. But the ones I've listed here are mostly just the named tributaries, and some of them just don't have a name. There are some of the common water quality issues that we see in our other streams, and that is bacteria and temperature. This is one of our most rapidly developing watersheds, as if you live out in Ridgefield or around there. Just being so close to the I-5 corridor, a lot of development pressure out there, and that area used to be some really beautiful oak savanna habitat. So we've talked a lot about water quality issues, and I'm going to show you a little bit more in a moment how you can find exactly what watershed you're in right now or wherever you might want to be. But real quick, I want to talk about some of the pollutants that we did mention, and some of the actions that people can do to help prevent those pollutants. Well, we start with bacteria. As I mentioned, dog is found almost everywhere. Certainly there are some watersheds where bacteria is an issue because of maybe some type of an agricultural operation with a lot of like a dairy or something. Sometimes it's even, could be geese. They love to go out there to a grassy area and mow it down and leave a whole bunch of stuff there behind. But picking up after your dog is a huge one, especially in urban areas where you're not seeing the same level of geese and there are no farm animals. What else could it be? Well, a big one is dogs. It could also be septic systems. So maintaining septic systems is huge. There's a program called the WSU Small Acreage Program, and they have some well and septic maintenance workshops throughout the year. They're actually having one tonight, so you missed that one. But they have them frequently, so check out the WSU Small Acreage Program. if you're interested in learning more about that and how you can do that. Of course, covering manure piles if you're in an ag area is a real important thing to do to help prevent that bacteria from, running over that manure pile and running down the hill and running into the stream. Temperature, maintaining native riparian vegetation is probably the best thing to do if you have it. In certain cases, you can add trees for shade. What I will say is if you do have a stream or a creek running through your property and you want to add some trees to shade, it's a great idea to kind of get in contact with an organization like the Clark Conservation District, because those are sensitive areas, really important habitat. And so it's great to get some feedback and some technical assistance on how to do it right. And so another way to do it is to volunteer with the riparian restoration projects. You have organizations like the Watershed Alliance, the Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership, who's doing a lot of that work out in Steigerwald, planting a lot of trees, trying to shade these stream corridors, because as we mentioned before, how do you really approach that problem? Well, shade created by trees is, the best way to do that. Phosphorus, which I lumped in here with dissolved oxygen. The action to reduce fertilizer. Use the right amount of slow release at the right time, which is a little bit in May and a little bit in September if you need it. If you have a pasture and you need to fertilize, make sure you test your soil first. A lot of people are moving away from lawns altogether, which is one approach. But really reducing fertilizer. If you spill some fertilizer on the street or something, or on the sidewalk, make sure you sweep it up. Make sure it's on the vegetation so it's not able to just run off the street or the sidewalk, something like that. Also, though, maintaining septic systems, managing manure, i.e. covering manure piles, composting it, are some other practices that can help with that. Turbidity, sweeping up instead of power washing is one thing that homeowners can do. A lot of times, you got some stuff on your driveway, and when we think about cleaning, we think about washing. At least I did before I kind of got in this world. So it's pretty natural to think, yeah, I'm going to get the hose, I'm going to wash that off. But sweeping up first can have a huge impact. You can sweep that up, sweep up debris or dirt or whatever it is, plant material, sweep that up, get it off there. If you still need to power wash, you really need to get it clean or something, do that, but do it without soap for sure. Other thing, plant vegetation on bare soil. You probably look around, see a lot of development in Clark County these days. You clear a whole bunch of area and you got a whole bunch of bare soil for a long time. Those contractors are meant to be have pretty strict erosion control plans that they're required to have. But even as a homeowner, if you have some bare soil, obviously you're not held to erosion control plan, but there's things you can do to keep that soil from running off and running down the storm drain. And if you have a private catch basin, maybe you live in an HOA or you have a private business, maintaining those catch basins can also help. The idea with those is they go down the storm drain. There's a kind of a sump area will allow that water those particles in the water to settle and let the less turbid water go down the pipe and into the stream. And then there's a whole litany of other ones here, in heavy metals and chemicals of emerging chemicals of concern, they call them. These are things that are like, zinc and copper, which are, very detrimental to salmon. And, different compounds, chemical compounds that are in fertilizers, or not fertilizers, some in fertilizers, but in pesticides and herbicides, stuff that's, meant for indoor use. If you just left an old tube television all cracked up outside, there's all sorts of different chemicals in there that are outside, when it rains, those things get picked up. And, you know, I was looking on the 303D list, and they actually have a ranking scale of like 1 to 5. And the ones that I've been showing in this slideshow have all been 5. And that might not be 5 in the entire watershed. I should have mentioned that, but at least in some part of the watershed. But there are some creeks and streams that do show some level of these other type of pollutants. Heavy metals, you know, tires are huge. Alternatives to driving. I know that's a tough one to do sometimes, but there's more and more these days. We can find ways to carpool or use public transport or walk or ride bikes if you're in that type of neighborhood. You know, avoiding pesticide products, particularly the fertilizer and pesticide products, sometimes known as weed and feed. Those are some chemicals that are being found more and more frequently, and that can really cause some issues. If you're washing vehicles, you know, do it at a car wash or on the grass. Disposing of pharmaceuticals, you know, definitely not outside. But even some of these pharmaceuticals, you know, don't even flush them down the toilet, because a lot of times they can actually bypass the wastewater treatment that's happening and still persist as that wastewater, that treated wastewater is put back into the stream. Same with household hazardous waste. You know, make sure you maintain that properly, and then maintain vehicles too. You know, we have a program now. If you go to fixthatleak.org, you can actually find a place that will give you a free leak check and a discount on leak fixes. And then kind of on a fundamental level, you know, when you're doing things, just ask. When you're outside, ask, can this wash into a storm drain or a stream? If it's outside on a hard surface and it's still there when you're done with your job, the answer is yes, it can wash into that storm drain or that stream. And that storm drain will lead to that stream. And so, you know, just being careful about what you do outside, what you put outside, and how you clean up outside are huge things. I'm going to switch real quick. I'm going to show you this thing real quick here. Let me move this over. This is a website that Stormwater Partners put together, and you guys as watershed stewards might find it pretty interesting. So here we are. It's called Explore Your Watershed. I think you should be sharing that. Let me know if you can't. Somebody let me know in the comments if you can't see that screen right now.
Good, Eric. We can see it.
This first, you go here. It's clarkwatersheds.org, and you click on the fish. You can click on that link, and that will take you to this story map here. And there's some really neat things you can do here. You can look all about what your specific watershed is. You can find what your watershed is. And so you can do this. You could put in an address. I used to work for WSU Extension, so I always remember their address. It's a good one to put in. And you can see there, that's where the 78th Street Heritage Farm is. It's in the Salmon Creek watershed, barely. So 78th Street, you know, running across here, if you can kind of think about it, that property there, if you've ever been to the Heritage Farm, is on a big hill. And so, you know, you come in, the main building's right there by 78th Street, but on the other side of the hill, which is a great example of a watershed boundary being a ridge, you know, when you're on the north side of that hill, it's all going to flow into Salmon Creek. When you're on the south side of that hill or that ridge, you're actually in the Burnt Bridge Creek watershed. So you can do that and find your own watershed that way. And then you could go to Salmon Creek right here, and you could dig down even more, and you could find out what sub-watershed you're in. So I'll just do that address again. So as you can see, Cougar Creek, so part of the 78th Street Heritage Farm, at least where the building is in the Cougar Creek sub-watershed of Salmon Creek. So I encourage you to do that. There's a whole bunch of other tabs across the top, things about what you can do if you're interested in learning more about some activities that you want to do at home. Here's a great graphic from the Clark Conservation District. There's some other things here. You can just scroll down, and as you do that, the scene will change. Some different tips will come up. You could check out stream health, and this will be the last little piece I show you just because I think it's really neat. There's this map here which kind of shows land cover and stream health, and it's pretty neat because these are the streams of Clark County, and there's this slider bar here. You can see a legend up there. Blue is excellent, green is good, and red is fair, and you can just scroll back and forth and see the health of your stream that way too. This information was taken a few years ago, and hopefully it can be updated in the next year or so. And that's what I've got. So now I think I've got some questions. Is that right, Ashley?
Yeah, I was able to answer a lot of the questions already. There was a couple that came in. I thank you so much, Eric, for the presentation. One person, I think you already discussed it, but maybe you can just quickly touch on toxic algae.
Yeah. So, you see this. I think it was just a couple weeks ago. It was at was Lacamas Lake. Was that what it was? Or Lacamas or Round Lake was? They had a warning issued. Yes, the blue-green algae. I can't remember the scientific name off the top of my head right now. But yeah, you get a lot of these fertilizers. You get nutrients. We'll say nutrients because some of it could come from fecal matter, which has some level of nutrient in it as well. But a lot of times it's coming from lawns, from fertilizing, and that runoff gets into a stream, gets into a water body, it accumulates, and that's when you start to have these toxic algae blooms, and they can really blow up quickly. Every year you see Vancouver Lake is hit with at least a few of these, and you got a lot of things in action there. You have a very shallow lake. I think Vancouver Lake is nowhere more than 12 feet deep or something, and then so it's warm, and then you have Burnt Bridge Creek coming in, a very urbanized area with a lot of houses there, bringing a lot of those nutrients in there, and then and next thing you know, that plant growth starts to take off, and the algae growth starts to take off. And if you get that blue-green algae, it is toxic. And yeah, it is a growing problem. And I think a lot of that is, people. There's all sorts of different hypotheses, but I think a lot of it, the source people believe is just in residential lawns. There's a lot of pressure. If you're in an HOA, you have to have your yard this and that. Other people just want their yard like that. And a lot of times, I get it because you walk into the store saying, hey, how do I fix my lawn? And you walk into a big box store, and what do you see? You see all these things that's like, just put this on there and it'll fix it, or a weed and feed, and just here, we'll sell you a big bag. And the key there is, they do have labels. So always read that label. And I just, encourage your neighbors to do that too.
Thanks. We are a little bit over on time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's. I know that I think I answered most of the questions. Feel free to contact Eric or I. Eric, do you have a contact page that you can throw up while I'm talking? My contact information should be in every email that you got. And Eric is going to hopefully throw up some contact. I can also throw that into the chat as well. But thank you so much for joining us this week. And as I mentioned at the conclusion of this, there should be a survey link that pops up. If it doesn't, please go to our website and fill that out. It'll also be in the follow-up email to this. And like I mentioned, if you fill out the survey, you get entered in for a drawing for a free, awesome Watershed Stewardship or Watershed Partners sticker. So we highly encourage that. If you are hoping to join for the rest of our series, there's the sticker, Eric showing it. If you're hoping to join for the rest of the series, then please sign up for each of the individual workshops, and we look forward to seeing you at each of those. And as I mentioned, these are all being recorded and will all be online, and by filling out those surveys gives proof that you've done it. And if you complete all of them, then you become a watershed steward and potentially get some awesome prizes. So we look forward to seeing you next week. Let's all give Eric a clap for his great presentation today. I hear those claps from everywhere. And again, I look forward to seeing you next week at 7 p.m. So with that, I am going to sign off, and we will see you later.